Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my fight predictions on the Joshua Wilder card that's going to be happening tomorrow. At least I believe that it's going to be happening tomorrow. I believe that that is the card that everyone is going to be talking about tomorrow. I believe it happens tomorrow and this weekend. But anyways, this is, of course, going to be the fight card that was talked about a little bit ago, where both Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, they're going to be the headliner and the co-main headliner. Of course, for the main event, Anthony Joshua will be fighting against that, I believe, of the Swedish fighter, that of Otto Wallin, whereas Deontay Wilder, he'll be facing against the former WBO champion, I believe, from that of New Zealand, Mr. Joseph Parker. And of course, you also have Mr. Dimitri Bivol on here, I believe, who's going to be fighting Lyndon Arthur. I believe that that's his name. If I'm wrong about that, somebody correct me. I may go live for this fight tomorrow. It'll depend on how I'm feeling at the moment. Unfortunately, I still am a little bit sick. That's a big part of the reason why I haven't done as many videos as of late. But hopefully I'll be able to be there. We'll see what ends up happening with that. But anyways, now to pretty much get down to my fight predictions, and of course we have to talk about both the Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker fight, and also that of the Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fight. And these are very interesting fights, not necessarily, excuse me, not necessarily because I 100% think that either of them are going to lose this fight, or necessarily, or that I think that Otto Wallin or that Joseph Parker, in their correct perspectives, that if both of these fighters are at their best, that they would be super great challenges for them. But right now, we don't really know where Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder are. If I had to guess who's probably in a better place, just from what I've seen, it appears that Deontay Wilder appears to be in a better place. He suffered more knockouts, of course. Now, of course, that was against that of Tyson the Gypsy King Fury. But we don't really know where Deontay Wilder is. He suffered a lot of damage. He still seems a little bit more confident in himself than that of Anthony Joshua. And when I've taken a look at Anthony Joshua in his past couple fights, to be honest with you, he looks like a fighter that is completely shot. He looks like a fighter that really almost has nothing left. And those two fights against Alexander Usyk, sometimes getting stopped is a little bit better than just getting completely outperformed the way that he did against Alexander Usyk in both of those fights, because Anthony Joshua has always been able to kind of come back in his career. Well, in both of those fights, not only was at times he almost dropped or stopped in that fight, but in certain times, Alexander Usyk was just able to completely outbox and embarrass Anthony Joshua. And in my view, neither of those fights are really particularly close. I thought that Alexander Usyk, that he clearly won those fights 8-4 in both of those occasions. So we'll see where Anthony Joshua is going on from here. But Anthony Joshua right now is very mentally cracked, in my opinion. I'm not going to say that he's completely mentally done, but if he ended up losing this fight tomorrow against Otto Wallin, who is not the worst challenger on the planet Earth, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, just to talk about the first fight here, and that's going to be Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker. What is my prediction going to be when it comes to that of Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker? I do personally predict that of Deontay Wilder to win the fight. I still think that Wilder has a little bit of confidence within himself. I think he realizes that Tyson Fury fight, that Tyson Fury just has his number, but it appears that the power is still there. It appears that somewhat of his confidence is still there. It appears that he still is willing to brawl, or at least willing to throw a little bit more, kind of more than that of an Anthony Joshua. Joseph Parker also as well. I don't really know where he is. He's been stopped, I believe, once at this point in time in his career by Joe Joyce. He's not really a top 10 heavyweight in the world any longer, at least in my personal view. He's been replaced by other certain guys such as Zhang, whatever his name is, Joe Joyce, and Hrgovic, I believe, that one Croatian fighter. He's pretty much been replaced by those guys. I've always said about Joseph Parker myself, and this has just always been my view on him, I always thought that he was the most overrated heavyweight champion and the most overrated heavyweight fighter of the past 10 plus years. And the reason why I say that is because I never seen someone that was an A+ level fighter. Every time that I would criticize Joseph Parker, I always got these New Zealanders or certain looks from people saying, oh, you don't realize how good he is. When it comes down to it, you don't know what you're talking about. And then it turns out pretty much in every big fight in Joseph Parker's career that I ended up being correct about him. And Joe Joyce pretty much ended that ship once and for all. Joseph Parker, in my view, he's a very physically gifted man. He's a very physically gifted heavyweight. He's very quick. He doesn't have the worst power in the world. but every single time that I've seen Joseph Parker in a fight where he's actually needed to win, there's either been times where like against Anthony Joshua, he didn't do anywhere near enough to try and really win the fight, in my view, or throw enough in order to win that fight. Or he's just way too wide open. He doesn't have that great of a defense. And on top of that, he can be vulnerable to be hit. And he can slow down as the fight goes along. Really, unless we're talking about the Andrew Ruiz fight, what big fights has Joseph Parker really ever won in his career? It just is what it is. And I know a lot of people may disagree with that, but it just is what it is. Joseph Parker, in my view, he's definitely not the worst opponent. It's a good little fight because, you don't really know excuse me, where Deontay Wilder is. It's going to be a name that a lot of people know. So it's going to be very good. But what do I personally predict? I personally predict Deontay Wilder is more than likely going to be able to stop him. I'm going to assume anywhere from rounds 4 to 7. That's what I'm going to say. Or anywhere from round 6 to 7. If he ended up knocking him out early on, my original prediction was going to be that Wilder was going to knock him out within rounds 3 to 4. But the reason why I'm not predicting that early is because I think, just in my personal view, that Joseph Parker is going to be very cautious. I think that he's going to be very cautious. I don't think that he's just going to barrel on in there. I could be wrong about that, but certain guys, they talk all this game about how they want to win the fight, but then they get in the ring and get in that fight and, it just completely changes. And Joseph Parker has done that once or twice in his career. He did do it a little bit against Anthony Joshua. We're sure he did throw at certain times, and the referee was a little bit, splitting them up a little bit much. But Joseph Parker was not throwing anywhere near enough as what he needed to in that fight. So I predict more than likely that Wilder's probably going to stop him anywhere from round 6 to 7. I think potentially if Joseph Parker is actually willing to exchange and willing to actually throw and try to box Deontay Wilder, I think that there's a potential that he could win this fight. I think that there's a potential that he could win, at least win some rounds. But I don't really know what to expect from Joseph Parker here. Is he going to be overly cautious? Is he just going to barrel on in there and basically say, you know what, screw it. If I don't win this, it's basically the end of my career. What's going to happen from Joseph Parker here? I don't really know what he's going to end up doing. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Joseph Parker ends up doing. So that pretty much is my prediction for the Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker fight. I'm going to predict Deontay Wilder to knock him out, anywhere from round 6 to 7. If he did it early, I wouldn't be surprised if Joseph Parker actually tries to get in there. If he actually tries to get in there and actually tries to fight Deontay Wilder, which is what he's going to have to do in order to win the fight, then I would predict Deontay Wilder to probably knock him out within rounds 3 to 4. And he could hurt Deontay Wilder. He could potentially win the fight. It isn't that Joseph Parker doesn't have power. It isn't that he doesn't have speed. He's a great athlete. But the problem is with Joseph Parker is that he's not a great defensive fighter. He is only about 6'4", I believe, with a limited arm reach compared to that of Deontay Wilder. Keep in mind that Wilder is 6'7", and he's a guy that I believe has about an 83-inch arm reach or something that of a sort. So Joseph Parker is going to have certain limitations in this fight unless he stays on the inside against Deontay Wilder the whole entire time, doesn't really show great fatigue, and then on top of that improves his defense to a certain degree. Have I ever seen that version of Joseph Parker? No. just my personal view of things, but it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much my prediction on the Wilder versus Parker fight. I thought that I would kind of talk about that one. Let's now move on to the Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fight. And out of the two possible fights here where the guy has the more troubling task, in my view, it's actually Anthony Joshua. I know a lot of people will take a look at Joseph Parker and they'll say, what are you talking about? He's fast, he's strong, he's a guy that was a former champion, and a former top 10 guy. How could you say that Anthony Joshua has the tougher task of the two? Because I think that Otto Wallin, at his best, is a smarter fighter, in my view, than what Joseph Parker ever was. I know that a lot of people are going to disagree, but I think there's also a reason why he gave Tyson Fury such a tough time. Now, that being said, Tyson Fury also was known as a guy that fights to the level of his competition. So we're going to see how smart Otto Wallin actually is. But Otto Wallin, from what I hear, whether it's Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury or even some of the other guys out there, he apparently gives certain guys hell in sparring matches. He's a guy that doesn't really give anything easy to you. He's a guy that thinks before he does things. Apparently, he's a fighter that is decently well schooled. Now, is he an elite fighter? No, he's not necessarily that. But this is a great test for Anthony Joshua because he's really going to push him to his limits. Robert Elenius pretty much was just, he pretty much overall was a walking stick in there. He was just basically meant for Anthony Joshua to knock him out. And there was still a lot of rounds where Anthony Joshua, I'm not quite sure if he won those rounds. Excuse me. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I think that Otto Wallin, I think that he will be the tougher challenge. And even if you believe that Joseph Parker is the more intelligent fighter at one point in time, that would be up to you. But when it comes down to it, Joseph Parker has lost several times within the past few years, or at least a few times within the past few years. One to Dillian White, one, I believe, to that of Joe Joyce, and another one to that of AJ Anthony Joshua as well. And there might even be another loss there that I'm not remembering. But either way, when it comes down to it, that's pretty much Joseph Parker's record. Otto Wallin, he would be the fresher fighter of the two. Now, he hasn't necessarily been in as many big fights as that of Joseph Parker necessarily, but he has been in one big fight against Tyson Fury where it was razor-thin close because of the cut that he was able to cause to Tyson Fury very early on. He's a sharp fighter. He's a guy that, once again, he's not the worst thinker in the ring in the world. And on top of that, he could be a little bit more dangerous and fresher than what certain people anticipated. This is not going to be an easy fight for Anthony Joshua if Anthony Joshua does not overall dot his I's and cross his T's. It's going to be a very interesting fight. I think that Otto Wallin, in my view, is more of a threat to AJ than what Joseph Parker is to Deontay Wilder. But that also depends on what version I see of them. I think that if this fight is going to get made between AJ, Anthony Joshua, and Deontay Wilder, which I think it will get made next year, as long as they both win their fights. But the thing is that if AJ is going to beat Deontay Wilder, at least a version of Wilder that I still overall hear about, or that I think still might potentially be in there, Anthony Joshua is going to have to be a lot better than what he was in the Robert Elenius fight. He's going to have to be at least what he was in the Kubrat Pulev fight. He's going to have to throw consistently. He's going to have to show some level of confidence. Because if he doesn't, Wilder is either A, just going to outbox him pretty much from the outside and have Anthony Joshua stricken in fear, or B, eventually he's going to catch him and he's just going to knock him out. And there's a potential of that to happen anyway. When it comes to there's a potential of that to happen anyway. But we'll see overall what ends up happening with that. It's also going to be very interesting because when it comes to Wilder and AJ, Anthony Joshua's career, excuse me, there's also the question about if someone loses here or if they both lose, who is it more damaging for? And, certain people may not be answering that question. I actually believe that it's more damaging for Deontay Wilder's career. And the reason why I say that, and I know Wilder and, the LDBC fans and Wilder fans are saying, what are you talking about? AJ Anthony Joshua has lost to all these guys, blah, blah, blah. If Deontay Wilder ends up losing to that of Joseph Parker, he's going to be remembered by a lot of people, whether you agree with this or not, as the biggest hype job that the heavyweight division has ever seen. That's what he's going to be remembered. He's going to be remembered, if he loses to Joseph Parker, he's going to be remembered as the biggest hype job that the heavyweight division has ever seen. That's what he's going to be remembered as. And the reason why that is, and I keep telling people this, because Deontay Wilder has no resume to speak of whatsoever when you talk against elite fighters. He beat a Luis Ortiz, who was a very good fighter, but never once a champion within that weight division. We don't know if he would have beaten Andrew Ruiz or excuse me, or Joseph Parker or Joe Joyce at his best. To be honest with you, I'm not quite sure if I would have favored him in any single one of those fights. At least with Anthony Joshua, if he loses tomorrow, you can say that for sure that he was a mentally done and shot fighter, because we all know that Anthony Joshua has Kubrat Pulev on his record. We all know that he kind of has that older version of Klitschko there. He has Dillian White. He has Joseph Parker. He has Alexander Povetkin. He has some of those other guys there. Who really does Deontay Wilder have? And, once again, would I necessarily agree with the fact that he's the biggest hype job? I would have to see how he looks. If he looks like a complete shot fighter, and if he ends up losing this fight, I would say that he looks shot. But if Wilder looks anywhere near the same and he actually loses this fight, it's going to be very damaging to his career. Very, very damaging. So once again, we'll see what ends up happening. And of course, it'd be very damaging to Anthony Joshua's career. But his career would just basically be over. If either of these fighters lose their fights tomorrow, their careers are pretty much over. But when it comes down to it, it would look worse, I think, on Deontay Wilder, because people would take a look at that resume and they would be like, well, the only two champions that you ever fought in your career, you lost to. At least AJ Anthony Joshua, he can say that I've beaten several champions in my career, including the one also that beat me at one point in time, Mr. Andrew Ruiz. At least he can say that. So, we'll see. But I predict Deontay Wilder to get the knockout. I predict Anthony Joshua to win by decision. If I were to see a knockout from Anthony Joshua, I wouldn't be shocked. But we'll see what ends up happening with that. It'll be very interesting. And as for Dimitri Bivol, I predict him to win by unanimous decision as well. I'm not the most familiar with Lyndon Arthur, But I do believe that he had that, duo. I believe with that of Anthony Yard. He ended up winning one and he ended up losing one. I predict that Dimitri Bivol will be a little bit too much for him. That's what I predict for that fight. But that isn't really a full-on breakdown because I haven't really studied that fight. I have studied, however, Deontay Wilder and some of these other fighters. I predict that Anthony Joshua, that he will win by decision. But be very careful. Otto Wallin, he's a very crafty fighter. He's a very crafty fighter that can get you a little bit on the inside, that once again is a little bit smarter than what you think. We'll see what ends up happening. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for my fight prediction. We'll see whether I'm able to go live or not tomorrow. But anyways, thank you guys so much for your patience and tuning in as always. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see where this goes.